again, everyone, and welcome to the next VHS review. First off, happy birthday to me. For this momentous occasion, I wanted to take a deeper look into one of the last few Alec Baldwin releases I've got, that being James and the Red Balloon, because I've seen quite a number of people have very different opinions about this particular tape. Some say it's good, some say it's bad. So I figured it's time for me to see where I stand with this one. Of course, I'm not alone. Everyone, give a warm welcome to the Thomas and TUGS Man.
You know, I could have chosen a much better release to talk about. Percy Saves the Day, Mud Glorious Mud, hell, even It's Great to Be an Engine, even the Bob episode on Carnival Capers. But no, I choose this. And I chose it for a reason. I wasn't in the first episode of The Very Best of the Worst of Thomas and Friends, the episode where this release was featured on, so I kind of wanted to give my personal thoughts and why I think that James and the Red Balloon is the worst release of the classic era. And you know a release is bad when I had to cleanse my ears with the Michelangelos versions of all of these episodes on this DVD.
Alright, intros out of the way. Let's take a look at the history of James and the Red Balloon. James and the Red Balloon was released on VHS and DVD by Anchor Bay on July 22nd, 2003. Look at that! A couple of days right after my birthday! Huh, who knew? As you can see on the cover, we have quite the number of mistakes. James has wonky eyes, his whistle is missing, and a part of his cab is clipped off. Seems like this cover was a bit rushed, because there should be no reason why Thomas covers look this unprofessional. Well, that is if you look at this piece of crap. Moving on from that, I'm not exactly sure when this DVD was released, but like a few others before it, Red Balloon got its own CD sampler which contained the following songs. I also do not know how rare these samplers are, but if you're one of those collectors looking for them, good luck. And another thing for the DVDs, there was also a prototype cover, which honestly, in my opinion, looks much better than what we got. Anyway, 2 years later, on January 25th, 2005, the DVD was re-released with a slim case. And sometime in 2006, the VHS was re-released. It took a long time for this DVD to see the light of day until Lionsgate re-released it again on January 6, 2009. And in the same year, on September 15th, 2009, the DVD was released one final time. One last thing to note, on some DVDs, there's actually a misspelling where the word balloon is missing one of its L's. It's just like I said, this release definitely feels like it was rushed. Good God. Anyway, don't forget that you can also find Red Balloon in tons of different wooden railway packs, the Totally Thomas DVD pack, and the Friendship on the Tracks DVD collection. Okay, that does it for the history. Now let's take a look at the episodes. So James and the Red Balloon features 6 stories and a bonus song at the end. Our story stops are James and the Red Balloon, Twin Trouble, Edward the Really Useful Engine, The World's Strongest Engine, Rusty Saves the Day, and Duncan Duncan. So let's begin with our first episode, James and the Red Balloon. When a hot air balloon gives vacationers rides around the island, Thomas and James begin to question if it will take their passengers away. James then saves the balloon when it runs out of hot air, and STH reassures him that the balloon will only help to bring more vacationers to Sodor. Okay, well, we're off to about a decent start. I have a lot of fond memories with this episode because it was my only favorite off of this tape when I was a kid. But I've noticed in more recent years that I'm not as attached to it, as I feel like there are way better James-centered stories. It's still good though, don't get me wrong. I like the idea of them introducing a balloon to the series and just watching Thomas and James freak out about what it could possibly mean for them. Obviously, we know there's nothing to worry about, as this balloon only promoted more visitors coming to the island, which would also mean the engines would be busier taking them to and from. And I also don't know if I buy the whole James wanting to fly gimmick, but hey, one can dream, so I guess I can let it slide. And I gotta say this too. Baldwin, while still not at his very best, I think he's just fine here. And I know there are tons of other fans that say Angelus's dub is the superior version. Well, I'm gonna be honest here and say that, honestly, I prefer Michael Brandon's version, because he at least tries to make the episode sound more fun, and I especially love his take on this particular scene.
We're out of hot air, shouted a voice. Ah! cried James. What's happening? Crash, bang, wallop went the balloon and landed right on top of James.
Overall, this episode may not be one of my favorites anymore, but it is a nice story to come back to every once in a while. I rank it a 7 out of 10. What do you think, Gianluca?
Not even a minute in and I don't want to be here. Look, I've made it no secret that I really don't like Alec Baldwin's narration, but here, it's like the worst narration he's done. He's so flat that it makes the viewing experience far more boring than it should. As for the episode itself, it's kind of stupid. Like, why are Thomas and James worrying about a balloon that can only travel at 8 knots at 3,000 feet? Yeah, wait till Thomas and James hear about the Boeing 747. But as for a gimmicky episode, it works a lot better than Chocolate Crunch, because with Chocolate Crunch, it takes way too long to get to the point. With James and the Red Balloon, we understand there's a hot air balloon.
When are the media going to realize no one's interested in some rich trouser stain who's so bored he's got to fly around the balloon all day? I hope the next guy gets hit by lightning. It flies around in little fart circles.
So overall, it's just really okay. I'd honestly give it a 4 out of 10, but because it's the Alec Baldwin version of this, and he's so flat, I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 10.
Our second episode is Twin Trouble. After being pushed into a hay cart, Donald and Douglas refuse to work with each other anymore. But more confusion occurs when both twins are separated and Donald has to be rescued after crashing into a set of buffers. I gotta be honest here, but I'm not the biggest fan of this episode anymore. And it sucks because I did like this episode as a kid, simply because I loved seeing Donald and Douglas. Now I can honestly say that I hate it. And not just the US dub, but the UK dub too. I just don't like this episode in general. No surprise, but one of the reasons, if you already guessed it, is Baldwin's awful narration. The fact that he doesn't even attempt to give Donald and Douglas Scottish-sounding accents is abysmal. I don't know if it's because he didn't know how to do a Scottish accent or what, but something is not right about why he didn't try. Narration aside, this isn't my major issue. I don't like this episode simply because I find Donald and Douglas's bickering to be a bit stupid over the littlest thing. Yes, I can understand why Donald is pissed at the very beginning, but what annoys me is how he handles the situation. He's trying to purposely ignore Douglas without giving him a chance to tell his side. Even towards the middle end when Douglas is trying to be friendly and Donald says,
"Have you come to say you're sorry?"
Dude, what the f***? Just let it go already, god damn! This isn't me saying that brothers don't fight. They most certainly do. But I personally think this banter between them is a little too silly. Some might say that a similar thing like this happens in something like One Good Turn, when Bill and Ben have their silly argument. And while I understand why some fans don't care for this episode either, I actually don't mind this one, because ironically, I like to see Bill and Ben bicker at one another. It's just what they do as characters. But when it happens with Donald and Douglas, it just feels a little out of nowhere. I really don't know how else to properly explain that. One final thing I need to point out is that, again, a lot of fans have complained that this is the decline of Donald and Douglas's character. I actually disagree with that, because there are a few times in some lead roles, even cameos that they make, where they're not arguing with each other. You most definitely see the decline when you reach the CGI series, so I personally think this is a false claim to make. I really don't have much more to say about this other than I don't ever want to watch this episode again. I'm over it. Y'all remember when I said A Bad Day for Harold was a 0 out of 10? Yeah, can I retract that statement and flip it over here? I know that may upset some people, but guess what? There's a corner. Go cry about it. No hesitation, this episode gets a 0 out of 10 from me. Alright, Gianluca, what do you think?
I think people are way too harsh on this episode. I like Twin Trouble, and rewatching the UK version, it is a good episode. But I'm watching Alec Baldwin's narration. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm just bashing on Baldwin for this, But no, this is the part in where I have to say it. His narration is awful. To people who say his narration is not that bad in Series 6, I show them this episode. Yeah, there's no going back. Seriously, why couldn't Michael Brandon narrate this episode? Also, people say this episode is the start of Donald and Douglas's eventual decline as characters. I find that argument fairly weak, because their next appearance in A Bad Day at Castle Lock, they're acting friendly towards each other. The same goes for Gordon and the Engineer from Series 11. This is only a problem with the CGI series. As for the episode itself, like I said, the UK version of it is good, but watching the US version, it's just decent. I still feel like this episode gets a little bit too much hate, but the US version deserves all the hate. But Donald and Douglas's theme in this episode slaps. I love it. So overall, I would give it a 5 out of 10. But because it's the Alec Baldwin version, no hesitation, 3 out of 10.
Next episode is Edward the Really Useful Engine, or Edward the Very Useful Engine for the UK fans. Okay, seriously, what the actual is the difference? Was a title change really that necessary for this one? Jesus Christ. Anyway, Gordon and the other big engines all feel like Edward should be retired. But when Duck and Gordon get stuck on Gordon's Hill, Edward is called to push the strange heavy train while also teaching Gordon a lesson. I have stated numerous times that I've sat through some pretty boring episodes in my time, but this has got to be the most boring episode I think I've ever watched. Nothing of significance or anything exciting happens. It's just there. I can't tell you how many times I almost fell asleep when I was trying to write a good review for this story. And of course, what's a boring story without a few gripes? First thing, this is supposedly another Edward-centered story, and the dude doesn't even do anything until the very end. Oh, yippee! And maybe this is just me, but I find it very hard to believe that Edward pushed that long train with ease. There was no struggling or anything. It went just like that. I'm not buying it, sorry. Now, even though that's a small issue for me, my biggest complaint has to be how much this episode retcons quite a few past events. You have to think all the way back to when Gordon was first rude to Edward, up until, say, Edward, Gordon, and Henry, and by the very end, all of them become really great friends. With that being said, Gordon and the others are back to smack-talking him by Edward's exploit until he proves how really useful he is. This gains their respect towards him. So if that's the case, then why all of a sudden are they back to being pricks to him? This makes no sense. It's actually this episode that is one of the many reasons why I don't like Gordon. Because like I said before, he's always the one to start shit. And it's the same crap we see with him too. He runs his mouth, gets himself into trouble, gets put in his place, and humbled by the end. But then guess what? He goes immediately back to square one. He doesn't change. Gordon just needs to learn to shut his damn mouth and mind his own business. And quickly going back to Edward for a sec, I don't know about you, but I'm getting really tired of seeing the same rinse, lather, repeat stories done with him. Stop telling us shit we already know. I've rambled about this episode for far too long, so I'm gonna cut it off here. I'm ranking this one, with no hesitation again, a 0 out of 10. I just don't give a shit about it. What do you think, Gianluca?
I'm really bored at this point. Like we said in the recent Very Best of the Worst of Thomas episode, I do like the idea that David Mitton was writing about himself in this episode, and it's a very good way to think of it. But other than that, the episode itself is just really boring. But like Twin Trouble, I don't think it deserves too much hate. I honestly think that both this and the UK version honestly sit fine at a 3.5 out of 10.
Up next is The World's Strongest Engine. After Henry crashes, Diesel is brought back to help, much to the other engines' dismay. However, when the trucks tease him, Diesel is determined to prove that he is a much stronger engine than Henry. Finally, we get to a really good episode! I can honestly say that after all this time, this episode is my favorite off of this tape, and one from Season 6 in general. I too have very fond memories with this one, as this was one of the stories my brother and I used to love to remake with our wooden railway trains. Granted, they never saw the light of day after a few times, but hey, we were just silly kids just having some fun. I bet most of you did the same shit with your trains too, don't lie. As for the episode, I get a very similar vibe from Pop Goes the Diesel, where Diesel had a similar problem with the freight cars. The only difference here is even though he is showing off, he's trying to outdo Henry in the process, and there's an added crash at the end which makes the story more fun and memorable. Let's get something straight here, Diesel. You're never gonna beat my boy Henry. It's just not meant to be, dude. Now, as much as I want to say I think this episode is slightly better than Pop Goes the Diesel, that's a really hard choice for me to make, as I love both episodes equally. Which is shocking because Baldwin's narration, like James and the Red Balloon, is fine here and doesn't really affect anything that much. But oh, how I wish Michael Brandon narrated this episode too, because you all know how much I adore his Diesel voice. This would have been the perfect episode for him to do. Overall, I still think this episode very much holds up, and it's one that I never get tired of. I'm ranking it a 9 out of 10. Gianluca, what are your thoughts?
Finally, a decent episode. What, it took us 4 episodes to get here? Oh my god. I have a lot of fun memories with this episode. I remember recreating it all the time with my Tommy Diesel and hitching 20 trucks to it and dropping him down the table. As for the episode itself, I still think it's really solid. It's like Pop Goes the Diesel, but with a crash, which makes it all the more exciting, but it doesn't make it better than Pop Goes the Diesel. I think both episodes are on the same level. And honestly, Alec Baldwin's narration doesn't really affect this episode, except for the truck singing.
Is that all you can haul? Henry's loads are longer.
Kinky.
Is that all you can haul? Henry must be stronger.
Angelus's delivery lives rent-free in my mind.
Is that all you can haul? Henry's loads are longer. Is that all you can haul? Henry must be stronger. Push us all, that's the longest. Push us all, you'll be the strongest. Heave ho, you can pull, but we won't go, sang the trucks.
But it doesn't change the fact that I still think it is a solid episode. I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Next episode is Rusty Saves the Day. When STH decides to close Rheneas and Skarloey's line, Rusty asks if they can use some extra time to repair it. With some help from Elizabeth, the team soon gets the line looking good as new. And we're right back to the doll stories. Great. Can't even begin to explain how many times I've heard so many fans say that this episode is terrible. Well, I can tell you that it's not the worst episode I've personally seen, but it is very uninteresting. I never showed that much interest in it even as a kid. Now, people say this episode is bad for a few reasons. It makes no sense why SDH would shut down the whole line if that would also include the quarry half. The Skarloey line shouldn't be in that much disrepair, because how do you let it go to shit just like that? And how did Rusty all of a sudden go to being only a quarry diesel when technically he's a maintenance diesel? With all of this in mind, I do agree that the continuity is a bit and nothing here makes any sense. Who could have possibly wrote this and not realized how much this story messes up quite a number of things? Well, that explains it then. I guess the only thing I will say is that I'm so glad Baldwin kept his voice for Elizabeth. I've stated before that it's one of my favorite voices he does. If he would have just done his regular voice like he's done for almost every character this season, there would have been hell to pay. One other thing that no one else really seems to talk about is the humor in this season. Because I gotta be honest, this whole scene is one of my favorites.
Well, I couldn't possibly help you. I'm a quarry truck. Well, we do need a special kind of truck. I am a special kind of truck. It requires hauling. I can haul. And pulling heavy branches, well, of course I can pull. So you'll do it? Well, of course.
I just get some kick out of how Elizabeth was pretty much manipulated into doing a job that she originally thought was a waste of time, and then she's all proud of herself once completed. Good job, Rusty. I don't really think there's anything else for me to talk about here. Like I said, it's certainly not the worst episode from Season 6, but I don't show that much interest in it. I simply don't care about it. I'm ranking it a 1 out of 10. Gianluca, what do you think?
Oh god, we had a good episode. Why must it go back to shit? Now, everyone hates this episode because of how much it breaks Sodor's continuity. That's not the main reason why I hate this episode. It's only a small factor. The biggest factor of why I hate Rusty Saves the Day is because the episode is boring. Nothing really happens in this episode other than the line is in disrepair. Let's fix it. Are we going to fix it? Of course they fix it. Such a pointless episode. This is easily, in my opinion, one of the worst episodes of Series 6. Up there with episodes like No Sleep for Cranky and Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry. 1 out of 10. That sole point going to that one interaction between Rusty and Elizabeth.
And now we come to our final episode, Duncan. While working at the incline, Duncan rushes the other engines to speed up their work, but he soon gets into trouble when he's pulled up the incline and speeds through a set of buffers. I'm getting really tired of repeating myself by this point, but this is yet another episode that I do not like. And this was another instance where I liked it as a kid, but now I can't stand it. Let's start with the fact that this kind of situation is nothing we haven't seen with Duncan before. The title alone is enough to reveal that Duncan is going to get into some kind of trouble, minus the fact that it also sounds like a Dunkin' Donuts jab. You know, you'd think by this point he'd learn not to be so careless with his work, especially with his incidents from Home at Last, Rock and Roll, and so on. But I suppose bad habits are not always easy to break for some of these characters. Also, the grumbling with Duncan about working at the incline is something you definitely hear from him, but it also sounds like he just has a problem with whatever job he's given. Remember, first it was the passengers, now it's this? What do you want, my guy? I'm also going to throw this out there, but I don't really like the look of this set for the incline railway. It just looks so plain and boring, and what I can't figure out is how a mysterious pair of buffers just shows up conveniently when Duncan comes rocketing down the incline. But I will admit, the crash is pretty wild, but as I've stated many times before, a crash is not enough to make an episode good. And the last thing to complain about, why am I not surprised? Baldwin's voice for Duncan. It's a real disappointment he dropped the voice he gave him back from Season 5. And what's funny is, I don't mind the voice he provides, but it also feels wrong. You know what I mean? Speaking of this Season 5 voice debate, part of me actually wants to know why Baldwin didn't attempt a similar sounding voice for Donald and Douglas. That would have been totally acceptable. But nonetheless, like I said, I just don't get that much enjoyment out of this episode anymore. I'm ranking it a 1.5 out of 10. What are your thoughts, Gianluca?
I used to love this episode as a kid. It was one I watched all the time, and I couldn't get enough of it. Rewatching it now, I was left incredibly disappointed. Not just the US version, the UK version as well. First of all, the incline looks like ass. How does the Series 6 incline look worse than the one in Series 9? Plus, this episode suffers from the same problem as Percy's Chocolate Crunch, a severe pacing issue. But at least with Chocolate Crunch, you don't know that the end result will be the chocolate factory. Is it out of nowhere? Yeah, but you don't expect it. Here, we understand that Duncan messes up whenever he's at the incline, and we know that he's gonna mess up. It takes forever for Duncan to actually get into a crash. Is the crash cool? Yes, but it takes way too long to actually get to the point. And I was left so disappointed because of how much I used to love this episode, and now I can safely say I hate it. This episode gets a 2 out of 10 from me.
Before we end things off, we have our bonus song, Down by the Docks. And this song slaps. When I first owned this tape, there was not a day that went by when I wasn't listening to this song. I was hooked on it. If you guys remember when I did my Classic Series song rankings, this song was actually in my personal top 10, until I made a last minute change and replaced it. That doesn't take anything away from it, not at all. But I will say my preferred way of listening to this song nowadays is the lower pitched version. It just feels more natural sounding to me. And I'll say this too, not that it's a major problem, But this song would have worked better on something like Salty Secret, and then maybe have James the Really Splendid Engine on this tape. Preferably for me, though, I would have had Salty on Salty Secret and the Red Balloon on this tape. Yes, I know they were made much later, I understand. That's just the way I would have liked to see these songs. But no matter what, it's still a bop regardless of what tape it's on. What are your thoughts, Gianluca?
Down by the Docks is an absolute bop of a song, but my main problem with it is why is it on this release? It would have worked better on Salty Secret. And what song is on Salty Secret? James a Really Splendid Engine. Why can't you just swap those songs? But other than that, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's still a great song.
So, what do we both think about James and the Red Balloon? Alright, Gianluca, what are your final thoughts?
The best way to describe James and the Red Balloon is absolutely nothing. There is a reason why I think it's the worst classic release. Appalling narration from Alec Baldwin, the fact there's only one episode that pokes out of its grave on that release, being World's Strongest Engine, and the other episodes just being really redundant to watch when you can just watch the superior UK versions of those episodes. Or in some cases, the superior Michael Brandon versions of those episodes, which leads me into a little way of how to fix James and the Red Balloon. Remember the Series 6 airings on PBS? There were only 6 episodes that Brandon narrated, and this release has 6 episodes. You could have easily replaced those episodes with the episodes that Brandon narrated, and replaced the Hartshorn M&E track with the original Mike and Jr. M&E track. It's just an interesting thought that I had. But other than that, this release just left me feeling so empty. By the time we got to the 3rd episode, I just wasn't feeling anything. I was just watching it. This release gets a 1 out of 10 from me.
I'm in agreement with Gianluca here, and I too believe that this is the weakest of the Season 6 tapes. No shocker, but Alec Baldwin is definitely at his worst here, and I feel like this is one of the reasons why Season 6 is so heavily hated on, is because of this release alone. Can't say that I blame fans for feeling this way. I still would love to know why Baldwin just dropped everything for this season. The enthusiasm isn't as good as his Season 5 narrations, and the character voices are very lackluster. And even now, most of us are still puzzled as to why, whether it was because of his divorce or whatever, but it's all just conveyed rumors and no concrete evidence to prove otherwise. And these are not my only feelings for this particular tape, but Season 6 in general just feels very rushed. Not a lot of time and care was put into this compared to the other 5. Let's be honest about something here. Narrations aside, you do have a few great episodes here and there, sure, but most stories from this season aren't as good as people make them out to be. I know fans lean more towards Michelangelo's dub, and I won't lie, that's how I would watch Season 6. If I say what's either a good or a bad story, then I mean it. And whether or not I do or don't like certain episodes, I think what would have worked better for the US tapes is having Michael Brandon narrate these with the original Mike and Jr. music, as Gianluca already pointed out. He already showed some potential when he did these for the PBS airings, so what gives? I'm also gonna let you guys in on a little secret I have with this tape. Something that I've actually never told anyone. But oh shit, not again!
I know your secret, your dirty little secret. Oh, I know your secret, your dirty little...
Good! We won't be seeing any more of him. Now, where was I? Oh yes, truthfully, this was one of the last few tapes I remember owning, and we didn't buy this until a year or so later after its initial release. But even when we got this tape, it didn't last very long. While yes, I did watch it, I wasn't really that attached to it compared to some of my other favorites, and there was one day when I forgot to put this tape back, and while my brother was running around the house, the tape got accidentally stepped on, and to be honest, I wasn't really that affected by it. So you can tell that even when I was younger, the attachment just wasn't there, and it still isn't even as an adult. I understand that most fans will think differently about some of these episodes, and hey, that's totally fine. If you dig it, I say go for it. But if you don't like the Season 6 US dub, then don't bother. Just do what everybody else does and go watch the UK dub. And that's gonna do it for this review. I want to thank Gianluca for joining me, and I want to thank all of you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more reviews and other Thomas-related content. And be sure to check out some of my other reviews in the playlist down below in the description. So what am I going to review next? Well, this time we're going to jump all the way to Season 11, and we're going to take a look at the last few Season 11 stories featuring the narrow gauge engines. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.